The Gospel according to Mark, chapter 12, verses 13 to 27. And they sent unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Cæsar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought it, and he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Cæsar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, Render to Cæsar the things that are Cæsar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marvelled at him. Then come unto him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection. And they asked him, saying, Master, Moses wrote unto us, If a man's brother die, and leave his wife behind him, and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife, and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and dying left no seed. And the second took her, and died, neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. And the 7 had her, and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall she be of them? For the 7 had her for wife. And Jesus answering said unto them, Do ye not therefore err, because ye know not the Scriptures, neither the power of God? For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. And as touching the dead, that they rise, have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err. There endeth our reading. Thank you, Lord. Amen. In this second reading from chapter 12 of Mark, we witness the continuing confrontation and disputes between Jesus and leaders of the Jewish culture of the day, occurring in the grounds of the temple in Jerusalem, in front of the disciples and a large crowd of people who are there partly because Jesus is there, but also because this is the week of the Passover festival, and Jerusalem would have been absolutely crammed with pilgrims at this time. Now, in the previous 2 readings, we have followed this conflict. In both cases, it's been quite direct and sharp, and in each case, Jesus has quite easily gained the upper hand. He's pushed away the attempts to discredit him. Now we're told that there's a more sort of crafty approach where Jesus is really being asked, catch-22 questions or leading questions, trying to catch him out. In the first case, it concerns really political things, earthly things, and in the second part of this reading, it's a theological question. So firstly then, the Pharisees and Herodians, who not normally would be easy bedfellows, but here the ministry of Jesus suits neither of them, are coming together to catch him in his words. The Pharisees essentially being the religious elite of the time, and the Herodians the political elite within the Herodian dynasty of that time. And they come to Jesus with a question really about taxation. They're very disingenuous. saying things that are clearly insincere. Master, we know that thou art true. You do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Jesus, of course, would see right through that, as would, I think, everyone else present. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Cæsar? The Holy Land, as with much of the world at that time, part of the Roman Empire and subject to Roman taxes. The question's catch-22 because really there's not an answer that can please everyone. If Jesus were to say, yes, it's lawful and right to pay taxes, then he would be in great disfavor with most of the Jewish people present, because the Jews quite rightly hated the Roman yoke. On the other hand, if he were to say, no, it's not right to pay taxes to Caesar, then the Jewish leaders would simply be able to bring him before the Roman governor and say this man is stirring up civil unrest. And it would be a very easy way to sort of get rid of Jesus. He would be put in prison and tried. However, Jesus gives an answer which I think is at one level very clever, but at another level very deep. And I won't be able to speak about it that deeply here because of time, but it's something maybe we can come back to over the gospel year. So they say to Jesus, shall we give or shall we not give? But Jesus knows they're being disingenuous, and he says, why tempt ye me? Bring me a coin that I may see it. And they bring a Roman coin. And as is often the case, Jesus uses questions against those that are trying to discredit him in order to allow them to essentially hang themselves with their own rope, as it were. So he says to them, well, whose image is on that coin? And whose writing, whose superscription? And the coin would have had an image of Tiberius Caesar on one side, and on the other his name, Tiberius Caesar. So they say unto him, Caesar's picture, Caesar's name. And Jesus answering says, give to Caesar the things that are his. It's his coin, his name and picture on it, give that to him. In other words, as a society, you are under the Roman yoke and you're using the Roman coin, which is their coin, so it's theirs to give to them. It's not ours. But, he says, and he immediately brings God to the fore here, give to God the things that are God's. It's a very politically and ethically astute answer, because it is saying the truth throughout all times, that there is always a balance on this earthly plane, if one has a civilized society, between duty which is civic and duty which is spiritual. Now we see here that the people marvelled at his answer. So this would have been the crowd that marvelled at the way that Jesus essentially pushed away this rather crafty, clever question. There is no question that the responsibility and duty to God infinitely outweighs the duty to societal governors, as it were, whether that's, in the olden days, essentially kings and queens, in more modern times, essentially governments run by political parties. And if we are to have civilized society, then there has to be lawfulness. But for a Christian, that lawfulness is a piece of elastic with a very finite amount of stretch in it. And if in our civic lives we are asked to do things which cut right across our Christian beliefs, there is no question but that we have to object and never compromise our relationship with God. And again, I'll come back to this several more times over the gospel year, because I have, over the years, developed some thinking around this in terms of what form of civic society is possible that is truly Christian. And I'm not sure, well, I know that we don't have that at the moment. I'm not sure whether we've ever had it. Enough said on that for now. Moving on, the Sadducees, these were a religious elite of the time who had a very severe, and I mean severe in the sense of sort of ascetic set of beliefs. Essentially, they only really worshipped from the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible, which are those ascribed to Moses. And they also had this belief that there were no spirits, there was no life after death, no resurrection. And they essentially are coming to Jesus, arguing that there's no resurrection and looking for his reply. And they used an example, because they only follow the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible, which is the Mosaic Law and this sort of story of Moses leading the people out of Egypt, out of bondage, and creating the first layer of Jewish law that would underpin this entire culture 1,500 or longer years before. Master Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind him and leave no children, that his brother has a responsibility to take this wife into his family and to try to raise children with her in honor of his brother. But then, in order to make the question more pointed, they take an extreme example, and it's just a hypothetical example. There were 7 brothers, and the eldest had a wife, but he died and there were no children. So the second brother married her into his family, but he died leaving no children from her. And likewise through all 7. So all 7 brothers had taken this most unfortunate of widows into their families, but had left no children from her, and finally she died also. And then they're asking this question as not believing in the resurrection, but they're saying now in the resurrection, in order to ridicule the idea of a resurrection. When they rise, 7 brothers and this one woman, and she's been a wife to all of them on the earthly plane, whose wife will she be? Thinking therefore, in asking this rather long-winded question, that it's an impossible answer because it is clearly ridiculous. But Jesus really pushes this away with great ease, because he says, first of all, you don't know the scriptures, and secondly, you don't know the power of God. In terms of the power of God and the resurrection, what Jesus says to them is that when the dead rise, it's not a continuation of our life on this earthly plane. So in terms of being married to a certain person, and the phrase here is, but are as the angels which are in heaven. And I'm sure there's been much discussion on that phrase. I've not read much that's enlightened me, so for the time being I think we'll just leave that phrase as it is. But essentially, though, it's more of a spirit world and not an existence that comes with it the relationships and the type of existence that we experience on this earthly plane. And again, hopefully over the Gospel year we'll come back to this theme a number of times and try to enrich the discussion of what could that be like. And maybe we can even bring in a little bit of science into that as to the nature of the spirit when we speak of a person's soul or a person's spirit either being resurrected or leaving them as they die. What could be the nature of that? And in terms of the scriptures, Jesus is again hanging them by their own petard here, so to speak, because he's using an example from the books of Moses here to essentially disprove to them their hypothesis that there's, or their belief rather, that there's no resurrection. Because he says, did you not read in the book of Moses that when God spake to Moses from the burning bush, he said, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, all of whom would have been long dead on the earthly plane in the time of Moses. But he's using the present tense. God is in speaking to Moses. And therefore Jesus concludes, he is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living, recognizing that living has a dual meaning. Our mortal lives in this earthly plane, and then the continuation of our soul after we die. Ye therefore do greatly, and puts that disputation firmly to bed. We'll continue in the next reading from chapter 12 to see how this very interesting public dialogue evolves. And note that really even some of the most critical supporters of the scribes and Pharisees start to be swayed by the wise words of Jesus.